This webinar is a part of the Cycle of Freedom series and it's titled Sustainable Freedom, the Dynamic Ingredients of Virtue, Faith, and Freedom. There are three stages of establishing freedom: winning freedom, organizing freedom, and sustaining freedom. The American experiment is attempting to answer this question, the third question: can freedom be sustained? What the framers believed should complement and reinforce the Constitution and its separation of powers is the distinctive moral ecology that is at the heart of ordered liberty. De Tocqueville called it the habits of the heart, and Guinness calls it the golden triangle of freedom. What is the golden triangle of freedom? Well, it's this concept that the cultivation and transmission of the conviction that freedom requires virtue, which requires faith, which requires freedom, which requires virtue, which requires faith, which requires freedom, and so on, like the recycling triangle ad infinitum. It's this golden triangle of freedom that keeps a society on the liberty side of the cycle. And a starting point for all of this is this concept of virtue. Well, the 1828 dictionary defines virtue as this: moral goodness, the practice of moral duties, conformity of life and conversation to the moral law, moral excellence, temperance, chastity, charity, abstaining from vice, voluntary obedience to the truth, excellent in things that constitute value and merit, and moral power and bravery. Well, one concept on this list stands out for exploration now: the practice of moral duties. Well, what might that mean? Well, here's a list of moral duties that would have been understood at the time of the founding. That moral duties include courage, self-responsibility, self-control, and diligence. It requires honesty and truthfulness and trustworthiness and integrity, sacrifice and benevolence. It requires fidelity and purity. It requires loyalty and patience, peacemaking and valuing of life, respecting others, faithfulness, forgiveness, and keeping promises, protecting others, and it requires justice and civic duty. These would all have been moral duties that would be well understood at the time of our founding and would make freedom work. These are elements of a virtuous society. But these are not just American ideas. These ideas go back through time, through centuries and millennia. St. Augustine, writing in the 4th century, said this: "Suppose we were to define what it means to be a people, not in the usual way, but in a different fashion, such as the following. A people is a multitudinous assemblage of rational beings united by concord regarding loved things held in common." Catch that phrase? Loved things held in common. What did they commonly love? He goes on to make this observation: "Then if we wish to discern the character of any given people, we would have to investigate what that people loves. Surely it is a better or worse people as it is united in loving things that are better or worse." What a profound thought from centuries ago. Here's another way of looking at it. Lord Moulton said this: "The greatness of a nation, its true civilization, is measured by the extent of its obedience to the unenforceable." John Wagner said this: "No system of social arrangements, no matter how cleverly devised, no matter how democratic in character, is adequate to preserve freedom unless it is undergirded by certain habits and attitudes which are shared by the members of society. Shared virtues of the things that are commonly loved determine the character of a society and of a people." Guinness, who we've been using extensively in this series to understand these concepts, introduces the faith component. Spiritual freedom is in fact a vital part of political freedom in its requirement for self-control, self-restraint, and self-government. It is that virtue and faith work together to provide freedom. Well, Teddy Roosevelt made this observation: "Americanism means the virtues of courage, honor, justice, sincerity, and hardihood, the virtues that made America. The things that will destroy America are prosperity at any price, peace at any price, safety first instead of duty first, the love of soft living, and the get-rich-quick theory of life." One thing he didn't include on this list, which is true today, is immorality at any price. So here's an observation from Guinness: "Any corruption of customs is therefore deadly serious for a nation, and no constitution by itself can ensure the permanence of a nation if its customs degenerate. And this is a map of a shredded United States symbolizing the corruption of a people and a culture. George Washington expressed these thoughts in his farewell address. Can it be that Providence has not connected the permanent felicity or happiness of a nation with its virtue? Only this would prevent our nation from running the course which has hitherto marked the destiny of all nations, that is, the right side, the declining side of the cycle of freedom. Os Guinness on this. Freedom thrives on self-restraint and the power to say no. It rests on strong convictions about what is true and on equally strong constraints against what is false. A culture with no claims on its members or curb on their desires would be a culture with no future. Well, this is because it takes courage to live virtuously. Remember this list? Courage is at the front of the list, and there's a reason why. Courage is rightly considered the foremost of the virtues, says Winston Churchill, for upon it all others depend. C.S. Lewis said this: courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point. Only courage can supply the self-restraint that is indispensable for living virtuously, which is the foundational requirement for liberty. Again, as we close, listen to George Washington on this topic. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are the indispensable support. So here again, Washington is combining virtue and faith. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. So attack virtue and faith, you attack the foundations of freedom, says Washington. As we conclude, Os Guinness has this reflection: individual atheists and secularists can be virtuous too, more so in some cases than many religious believers. But the political question is whether atheism and secularism can provide a sufficient foundation to foster the needed virtues of the wider citizenry over the course of the following generations. This task waits to be demonstrated. Remember how we started? The three stages of establishing freedom: winning freedom, organizing freedom, and sustaining freedom. The American experiment is attempting to answer this question: can freedom be sustained? I think this video and this content should give us something to think about. This is U.S. Civics Training. Thanks for listening.